Hi, and welcome to the BFI Woman with a Movie Camera Summit. My name's Clarisse Loughrey, and I'm the Chief Film Critic at The Independent, and I'm excited to be the host for today's event called Reclaiming Jennifer's Body, a discussion delving into how this film has, over the years, turned into a feminist queer cult classic. We'll be looking at how the film's critical and popular reception has changed since its release in 2009, and we'll be trying to figure out what drove that change. I'm joined by our two sparkling panelists, writer and film critic Sarah Fonseca and writer Lisa Wehrstedt. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to start with your own personal experiences with Jennifer's Body. Sarah, when did you first see the film, and did your reaction immediately feel at odds with the film's general reception?
That's a loaded one. Yes, I suppose I don't know how much it matters that I'm one of the people who's based in the United States on this call. So I suppose the perspective of where the movie was coming from within a very pointed teen milieu that was kind of defined by Britney Spears and Paris Hilton. This was kind of the final stage that this movie was speaking to. So I think everything was turning independent. There was more of a cynicism among my generation when I first saw this. And I saw it probably within the year it came out, when it was finally in DVD release and you could access it through more illicit means like torrenting. And I was really infatuated with the emotional chemistry between the two leads. And I think that stance has taken a more sophisticated angle as time has gone on, but mostly it was because it felt homoerotic that I kept coming back to it to witness certain scenes, and also recognizing how it was also mirroring my own friendship. So there was this duality at play. And I'm ashamed to say it as a film critic now, but when you're 19 years old and you see something like this, I personally did not read the reviews. I just kind of watched it kind of ebb out of the culture slowly. And while at the same time, I noticed that queer women were disagreeing with me on what I found enticing about the movie that's very physically and character driven. And so that tension was always there. And I think over time that perspective has matured, but it hasn't really changed. I'm still definitely captivated by Diablo Cody's sophomore effort.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that you didn't read the reviews. I mean, we'll get to them in a second, but it's nice that you got to see it like uninfluenced by everything. How about you, Lisa?
So I'm going to really show my age here, but when Jennifer's Body first came out, I had just turned 13. So I wasn't actually like able to go see it because I wasn't 18 yet. So I definitely saw it as an adult, kind of framed in sort of a more, like I didn't know much about it, but it definitely came to me framed as this is a movie that, did not receive its fair dues when it first came out, and it's being rediscovered. But one thing, like thinking back about on 2019 and 2009 and that time, I do remember like Megan Fox and the idea of Megan Fox being sort of like the sex symbol for boys my age, and I think that image of her was very, very strong in my head as I was going into this film as an adult still. But as soon as I saw the film, it sort of like I became enamored with it completely, and I just been rewatching it over and over again. And it's the kind of film where I think like if I had seen this as a 13-year-old, it would have changed my journey in like exploring my sexuality, and I would have probably realized much sooner that I'm a bisexual woman. And it's it's still a very important film in my life that I just wished I'd seen as a younger person, for like as kind of the audience that it was meant to be for, really.
Yeah, so I mean, you guys have brought up a lot of interesting points that we're going to get to in a second, but I I kind of want to take an outside in approach to this and start with how it was actually marketed. So Sarah, what went wrong?
Oh my goodness, where to start? And I alluded to it earlier, but this movie was kind of the last stage of the aughts, the 2000s, that sort of peaked at the beginning with boy band and boy girl and or girl band rather, dynamics and high sexualized performativity, while also having this very conservative culture that was condemning teen sexuality. I think there was this very intense maximification of Megan Fox, where she was kind of playing into it by her own terms, because I don't ever get the sense that Megan Fox coming out of Transformers and saying yes to these opportunities was ever anything that she was very coerced into. You know, I think it was simply these were the only opportunities available and she consented to them. So I think you have that already at play, and then you have this fusion of Megan Fox and Diablo Cody, who Diablo Cody is just off of this wave of success for Juno, and everyone's watching to see what she's going to do next. And she decides to do teens again, but she goes Gortastic. And so this is the energy, and I think there's always the idea when you're getting into teen horror movies that they're geared towards boys. And so once Kusama was tapped for this project, and you also had Diablo Cody involved, and it was going to be about teens, it was understood that it was going to be on their terms. So there were challenges with the studio and making them, the people at Fox, understand this. And I'm not familiar with it myself, but I believe there was some caveman-esque email that was sent to Kusama by a studio head. Do either of you happen to know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I can quote the email. It read just, "Jennifer sexy, she steal your boyfriend." As I'm trying to do the voice I imagine it was written in.
I know, and it seems like a line out of this movie, honestly, that's kind of making fun of troglodyte men. So the jokes just went over the studio's head. The marketing wasn't, and the money wasn't there. They were thinking about making a fake porn site with Jennifer Check as like a girl who can be purchased. And by the way, I think there's also an element of sex work that permeates this movie, and Diablo Cody's biography, literal and just physical, that is notable here too. But I think this movie was both a threat and something that the studio just wished weren't so complicated. Like, why can't you be a B movie? And Kusama just kind of owned it. I think in a BuzzFeed interview, maybe in 2019 or 2020, around the time Destroyer came out, that she was saying, you're going to send a bunch of boys to this theater and they're going to pan the movie because they're the primary victims within it. And so it's I guess the short of it can be feminism. There was no feminist marketing whatsoever.
Yeah, I believe the test screening reaction was boobs, but it was like MOARBEWPS.
Yeah, even the US poster for it, now that I'm thinking back, is just that collegiate font and Jennifer in a very Britney music video uniform sitting on a desk. And this isn't necessarily bad, but the semiotics that it's conjuring is a very, very shallow image that could be interchangeable with a Maxim spread or a music video off MTV. So I think there was a lot of just not recognizing who it was targeted for because the marketing completely obfuscated it.
So the one line that kind of stood out to me in, I think, in the same BuzzFeed interview that you were mentioning, Sarah, with Kusama, is that she had the feeling that the marketing team just had the marketing strategy already ready before the movie was even completed and just went with it without even watching the film, which is what, really, like what it felt to me like. looking back at it, it definitely felt like, they didn't, as you said, they didn't realize, they didn't integrate the feminist values and themes that the film was about in the marketing, which is, kind of ironic, seeing it is a film by a female director and a female writer with 2 female leads, and yeah, marketing towards boy, obviously, as we can see in retrospective, made 0 sense, but on the back of what Megan Fox was at the time, I guess to some people it made sense.
Right, and it's absolutely not a paint by numbers movie. One thing that is also coming to mind, and then then I will stop, is that when this movie entered production, and I do not know how specifically this happened, but there's the scene where Jennifer Check is at the boat dock and she's just kind of emerging from the water. Someone either involved with the production or affiliated with paparazzi took nude photos of Megan Fox while that scene was being shot, and they were leaked to all of these trash tabloids. So it was kind of this issue where Megan Fox wanted to do this movie, and Megan Fox made every choice she wanted, but I feel like she was consistently undermined at every turn. So these just images kind of fed into this idea of her that American culture was dead set on at that time too.
One thing that strikes me about the marketing campaign, and even just like our conversation now, is just how focused on Megan Fox it was. Well, if you went to see the movie thinking it was going to be a Megan Fox film, and then see that she wasn't actually the lead or the heroine in the film, is quite a disconnect there. I think that the marketing obviously didn't care to address at all.
So Lisa, I can't help but notice the picture behind you, I believe is of Jennifer's body art. And I mean, this is a little bit of a pop quiz hotshot question, but if you had the chance to redesign the marketing for Jennifer's body, what would it look like?
I mean, it would probably look like something like this, because I don't think that having Jennifer, with a bloody mouth makes that any less sexy than she was, propped up on a desk. But it also, well, for once, integrates both of our heroines and both of the main characters of the film, which I think, their relationship is what carries most of the themes of the film anyways. And excluding Needy, like Amanda Seyfried's character, is, doing quite a disservice to the film and to what it's meaning to say.
Okay, so I'm now going to quote a few of the contemporary reviews. Feel free to react facially if you like. James O'Healy at Fantastic Zine wrote, "We've seen episodes of Supernatural that are scarier and funnier. Plus, Megan Fox has a no nudity clause in her contract." And there's a little exclamation point after that just to emphasize it. James Berardinelli at Real Reviews said, "If you're in search for a way to ogle Megan Fox's body, there are a lot better ways to do it than subjecting yourself to this." And Roger Ebert, despite giving the film 3 stars, also said, "It's Twilight for boys with Megan Fox in the Robert Pattinson role, except that I recall Robert Pattinson was shirtless." I mean, Lisa, obviously I've just picked individual lines here. What would you say was the general takeaway for critics?
The thing that really confounded me looking at the reviews is that Megan Fox was accused of being both over-sexualized and under-sexualized. And it felt like, everyone going into the reviews just knew they weren't going to like this film. It felt very much like the same approach that the marketing team had, is that they were going to see what they wanted to see. They were going to see what the trailer made them think the film was going to be. And so for people who were expecting Megan Fox to strip naked, she was under-sexualized because she doesn't actually take off her clothes. And for people who were looking for, a more rompy horror, she was over-sexualized because, she shares a same-sex kiss with the other co-star. And so it really felt to me like I did not understand what critics a decade ago really wanted from this film, because it felt like it managed to please no one.
That's also funny because there's ultimately so much sex in the movie too.
But I guess, the sex that is there isn't sexy. So
right. It's what they're asking for is nudity. Ultimately, it's interesting. Yeah.
The more boobs, we've gone back to that somehow. And I do feel like it is important to point out at this point in the conversation that it wasn't just men. I've quoted men, but it wasn't just men who were reviewing this negatively. Vic Holterman at Screen Rant actually did the math on this, and out of 103 reviews examined, 39% of male critics reviewed it positively, but only 54% of women also reviewed it positively. So I wondered, Sarah, if you could kind of unpack that a little bit. I think Lisa touched on the idea that it was, it was either too much or too little sex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that was just kind of this virgin whore dichotomy of it all. It really permeates this history because you can have too much sex, but then the sex that's there doesn't count. It's almost like the definitions are different on both sides for critics. And I came to the conclusion with this film that the 50% kind of gridlock was just the intergenerational differences of the movie. You have Diablo Cody, who's coming from a very specific Midwestern, kind of working middle class background, who has kind of been a success overnight, and it's kind of baffling to older feminist critics who are waiting on the next, Jane Campion. And you have Diablo Cody, who is highly successful at that time. So I think a lot of older women critics were pulling the reins a bit, saying, can we please be a little bit more, I don't know, highbrow? I think it baffled them that this was what we were being offered, a film with two female leads, as has been said, a female writer and a female director, but the story isn't empowering in the right kind of, it isn't hitting the right notes. And I, at the same time, Jennifer's Body predated any sort of sex positivity, sex worker empowerment, revivalism, or sort of these threads of feminism that have all collectively culminated in this amalgam of Me Too, where we're addressing issues in the workplace. So I think that's evident in a lot of the criticism by female reviewers. And Hornaday was particularly ugly. She's at the Washington Post, and she called it a lurid adolescent distraction, which I feel like if I were Diablo Cody, that would almost feel like a betrayal of the generation before me. What's not clicking here? Because I don't think the feminist critics that I've read on this movie now, all these years later, who were just dispatching from 2009 and 2010, saw themselves as kind of being misogynistic because they wanted this movie to be something else entirely. It's really kind of fascinating to see those disparate threads of feminist criticism and thought at play.
Yeah, and Lisa, to build off of that, do you think it was partially the marketing that female critics were coming at it sort of assuming, I mean, obviously they knew that Karyn Kusama had directed it, but sort of assuming that it was somehow still being lensed through the male gaze?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think this sort of idea of the male gaze with which the film was sold to viewers and sold to critics ultimately made its way into people's reading of it, even people who aren't male and shouldn't have that male gaze internalized, but it kind of speaks to our own internalized misogyny in a way, and how we as women now or before kind of somehow still tend to go with that more prominent reading of the world and of art and films, even though with hindsight and reflection we can kind of be freed of it in a way.
It's like it's sort of like constantly being gaslit by
Yeah,
society, where it's like, what is my gaze? I don't know
yeah.
anymore. And going to the box office, so Jennifer's Body went on to earn 31.6 million worldwide on a 16 million budget, which is not great and was significantly below a lot of the other horror films from that year, including Paranormal Activity and Zombieland. And it feels like from the wider reaction to this film, there was definitely some sense of like backlash. Like there are people actively like attacking this movie. And there does seem to be several factors here. I mean, Sarah, you sort of briefly touched on this before, but tell me about Diablo Cody. Like, how were people talking about her at this time, fresh off that Oscar win?
Oh, goodness. You know, it was interesting because in the time leading up to and following the Oscars, she was kind of America's golden girl. MySpace was super active, and she was very active in running a blog. And I remember kind of reading them as craft lessons in writing, because I just got the sense that she was this populist voice who was like, I don't know why I'm at the Academy Awards. You know, it's all very punk rock, her ethos. And I think the establishment didn't like that, and two, she was exorbitantly successful at it, kind of seemingly overnight. Of course, we love to say that, but that's never really the case, especially where women who are able to make films go in the United States. But I remember she was just so self-effacing and anti-institution, because she posted a picture of herself on the red carpet at the Academy Awards and captioned it, "Hey, who's that fat Katy Perry?" You know, kind of making fun at herself and taking the wind out of her critics. So her star was also on the ascent because she was in talks with Steven Spielberg. She had a very strong collective of female screenwriter friends in California, including the Lorraine Shafaria, the director of Hustlers, I believe, was in that collective, and the New York Times did a glowing write-up, called it the Fempire. You know, it's like everything. I guess I was 21 at the time, and I was like, okay, Diablo's doing this in a really interesting way that doesn't seem like her soul is being taken. This all to say, she was working with Steven Spielberg on United States of Terror, which would be a television series, and Jennifer's Body preceded that. I think people were having Diablo Cody overload because her affect is extremely Midwestern. The dialogue in Jennifer's Body is like a cooler version of the dialogue from Juno, her successful predecessor. But I do think there was a little bit of fatigue from that, and it manifested around her identity as a woman, as someone prior to this who'd written a memoir about her experiences working in sex work, you know, at a time when no one was necessarily doing that, or it was like, you can be successful or you can be a sex worker. I feel like that was kind of the narrative. So to have Diablo so front and center, it was kind of the same phenomenon in the film world that was occurring with Megan Fox on screen. So they were both on the ascent, but the society had it out for them, I do think, at every turn, because ultimately, in rewatching the movie a few days ago, it's just like the dialogue is so intent in this movie on where the film is going. Even though the lines are hysterical and full of little quips, there's still an underlying purpose. And the fact that Diablo Cody can kind of toggle between those two things is just astounding. You kind of can't deny how good she is at that, but the society was just really hell-bent on saying otherwise.
Yeah, there's a great quote from her where she says, you know, at the time I was very aware of people's desire for me to fail, which I imagine is not a great feeling when you're trying to be a creative artist. And there was also an incident right before this film's release where Fox had, in an interview, made an offhand comment where she compared Michael Bay, her director in the Transformers films, to Hitler. And look, it obviously wasn't a great thing to say. Fox has been very apologetic about it since. But Lisa, would you perhaps agree that the reaction to it was a little out of proportions, shall we say?
Let's say that, yeah. I mean, it came like years and years before the Me Too movement was on, on anyone's radar. And so it was quite unprecedented to have, an A-list celebrity speak out about her treatment on set, but most of all, like, go against and antagonize the person who people believe gave her that career, so like her director and the person who made her who she is. And so the backlash against her was very much for being ungrateful for what Michael Bay did for her, and as well as any slur you can think of that she was probably appointed to her at some point in the backlash for that. And I mean, I don't think it's was wrong for her to do it. Of course, she kind of in a way like captained. She was a precursor of what we've seen happen many times since, of women, people of color, and queer folk just speaking out about their treatment on these predominantly white male industries. But I think it says a lot to how us, the media, film critics, have come in the way that we as a community, as an industry, replied to that in 2009, and how things are addressed now. And I think it's for the better, definitely. But that meant that Megan Fox was on everyone's mouth for these two reasons, like being the next big superstar, but also being ungrateful and if I may, a bitch for the way that she was handed this fame by a straight white male.
Yeah, she's was called a lot worse at the time, so I feel like it's okay to use that word in this context. But let's move on now to happier territory and to the actual reappraisal of the film that has happened since. And there have been so many pieces. There have been pieces by Ann Cohen for Refinery 29, Constance Grady for Vox. I've written a piece. Both of you have written pieces about it. It's been referenced in Halsey's song Killing Boys, and also in Olivia Rodrigo's video for Good For You, which is an absolute bop, I will just say. Sarah, when did you first become aware that the conversation around this film was starting to shift?
I think it was just the maturation of many millennial critics that was happening, the people who'd grown up alongside this movie and weren't necessarily privy to those discursive touchstones, but saw maybe like little glimpses, like say Megan Fox is over here talking about being bisexual and dating a stripper. Diablo Cody's over here making a new movie that isn't about teenagers, so and the cultural conversations are changing about structural inequity in Hollywood at the same time. So I feel like if you're a millennial, you're going to be a little bit ahead cognitively, a little bit ahead of society still. We're not the establishment fully yet. That's still definitely the boomers who kind of control all of these industries. So you had a bevy of women critics, queer critics, just people who genuinely love this film saying, wait a minute, I feel like I've been gaslit for the past decade of my life, because you're growing up and you're kind of maturing in your craft and you realize, oh, there are actually very objective black and white good things to say about this movie. For example, the sex scenes between Needy Lesnicky and her boyfriend are kind of centering her boredness, and I think Jennifer's too. They're all in control of these situations. I almost say that Diablo Cody and Kusama together have this first person omniscient female gaze over the film, because they can play with the male gaze on the screen in these ways that are indigenous tropes to horror. So like you have a sex scene that's going to go horribly awry and someone's going to die, but the script is subverted or flipped in ways where the female characters are the final girls, not just the final girls, but kind of the final people standing within this suburban high school ecosystem. So yeah, there's like so much good to rave about it. And once you realize that, it's, I always say I'm pink pilled about this certain era's movies, like those 2000 movies that seemed initially shallow, but were actually really great provocative feminist sex comedies in a certain way. And I guess the same is true for Jennifer's Body, where the femininity of this film was so scorned by both feminist critics and male critics who wanted more nudity. They didn't want the material feminism. So coming back around to it and saying like, oh no, it's significant that Jennifer's making these jokes. It's significant that this is an indie rock scene where things have historically gone historically poorly for women. And once you realize there's so much there, it's like, do I have to write the piece? You know, I'm not a critic who tries to go in a cynical direction, but I think with this one, it was just like a lot of middle fingers to the people who wrote this off, because I really wanted to see Diablo Cody do teens for film again.
Yeah, and Lisa, you've kind of spoken already about, in terms of its representation of sexuality, how that has, I think that theme has so much come to the forefront of discussion about this movie. I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think much of this sort of discovery of Jennifer's Body comes in like a wave of rediscovery of queer film and how, you know, queerness was treated in horror, and how, you know, much of horror is queer and is a queer genre, even, you know, if it might not wear on its sleeve. And yeah, I think like the you know, queerness of Jennifer's Body is still debated, again because it doesn't like wear it on its sleeve, and it's sort of like encapsulated by this one pivotal moment, which is, as we've kind of addressed it before, like the kiss between Jennifer and Needy, which, you know, can be seen in many different ways. Like it can be seen as like a confirmation of their sexuality, which is kind of hinted at throughout the film. Like they're called like lesbi gay, they talk about that sandbox romance, they talk about, you know, playing girlfriend and boyfriend as kids, and they're obviously, you know, very intimate friends. But it can also be read as, you know, a moment of vulnerability for Needy, and a moment of asserting her own power for Jennifer. It can be read as, you know, just their sort of codependence bursting out of themselves and kind of ending in this kiss. But I mean, however way you want to read it, like it's, I think, naive to think that, you know, Diablo Cody and Kusama did not know what they were doing with it, and did not know that they were, you know, purposely putting a same-sex kiss in their film, and that, you know, as they've mentioned both many times, like that kiss and that film wasn't meant for boys, it was meant for girls, for young queer people. And, you know, I think, I mean, I still read the kiss as a sexual moment, but, you know, I think the film is so rich with so many themes that it is a pivotal moment for many different threads that run throughout the film.
I wasn't sure if it was mentioned. I don't think it was, but Anita Lesniewski, her name is Needy Lesbian, a friend once pointed out to me, just to almost hammer it home that there is some sincerity to all of these things that are happening around Amanda Seyfried's character intimately.
Even the fact that whenever we see Needy with her boyfriend, it's never particularly romantic or particularly sensual. It's always, you know, a very bored, you know, boring missionary sex that they do, and there's never Needy's never seen to be particularly like enthralled with her boyfriend, and she quickly leaves him behind when she needs to focus on saving Jennifer, which, you know, is the most important person in her life.
And I feel like we should just touch on this topic briefly because it is such a big part of the Jennifer's Body conversation. It's so interesting to me that the virgin sacrifice scene where Jennifer is killed and offered to Satan so that the band Low Shoulder can attain fame and popularity. I mean, watching that today, it's such a clear metaphor for assault, but I feel like looking back at the reviews and the conversation at the time, like no one was really talking about that. I mean, Sarah, why do you think that is?
It's sort of the situation where I think you culturally can't see the forest for the trees. And we were talking about marketing earlier, and I think this idea of virginity gone bad could have been an excellent marketing device, because it's ultimately kind of the hook of the film that Jennifer's too filthy to even help this no-name indie band succeed because she's had too much sex. And so this is the chaos that precipitates. And I just, it is kind of shocking how it was overlooked, because I think honestly at the time this came out, we were just beginning to have those cultural conversations surrounding maybe people like Taylor Swift and Britney Spears in the United States about how they're good girls, but they're also bad girls, and they're penalized or embraced accordingly based on that.
Right. Well, I think unfortunately it's time for us to wrap up. I mean, I could keep analyzing this movie for 3 more hours, but unfortunately we don't have time. But I want to leave you both with one question. And let's say, Sarah, you go first, and then Lisa. If Jennifer's Body was released today, how would it be received?
I actually disagree with Diablo Cody. I think she's being very hard on herself when she says the movie wouldn't necessarily be successful in the contemporary. I think if the marketing were more sensible, and also people are actively almost myopically looking for Me Too movies. So I think it would be a movie where we would be out on the street and say, oh, this movie's so overrated, which would be a pleasure, frankly, to say a Diablo Cody movie is overrated, because up until this point they haven't been.
Yeah, I don't think that, Jennifer's Body is not the film that's gonna, become the next big thing, even if it was released today. It was always gonna meant to be, on the smaller side. But yeah, I agree with Sarah that we've seen, I think, so much coming out of films like Jennifer's Body that we've kind of become, in a way, like used to it. While, we still kind of look for those narratives, but I don't think, I think I mostly agree with Sarah about how it would be, overrated.
I love that we can end on a happy note. Thank you so much for taking the time out to watch this event. And I hope you're enjoying the first day of the summit. There's still some great events left to watch today, including How to Heal Cinema at 6 p.m, which will be a live conversation workshop focusing on the ways film and TV and its workers can begin to heal after the revelations of abuse within the industry, which is obviously relevant to our discussion. And I really hope you'll tune into it. Enjoy the rest of the summit, and thank you again for watching.